You know, I never fully understood why old ladies are such a common trope in the horror genre. I mean, old ladies are sweet. They're loving, kind, nurturing, easy to rob. So why is it that so many horror games depict them as ugly, decrepit hags? There is no shortage of examples for this. There is literally a killer in Dead by Daylight named the Hag. There has to be some deeply rooted reasoning for this, because it's not just the characters, it's what they represent. We're gonna deep dive into multiple horror games to discover not only why hags are so horrifying and what truly makes them effective antagonists, but also their subversion of safety and how each game tackles this concept. First, we need to define what is a hag and the historical context behind that term. Hagazussa is an old High German term which translates to Hedge Rider. Historically, the hedge was the boundary between a civilized village, representing order/safety, and the wild forest, representing chaos/danger. Another way to look at it is the hedge was the boundary between the physical and spiritual world. Women who lived on the outskirts of town or villages were widows, midwives, or herbalists and were seen as riding the hedge, physical and spiritual. Because they possessed forbidden knowledge at the time, like medicine, autonomy, and were not under a man's protection, they were reframed as monsters to keep society within that quote-unquote hedge. Now what's really cool is the term hag went through a process called pejoration. What that means, basically, is over time, a word's meaning shifts from a positive or neutral definition to a more negative one. Hagazussa was not necessarily a good term to begin with, but it wasn't bad either. It was a job meant to describe a woman at the edge of society that you would visit if someone was dying or a baby was being born. But she had the power to curse generations if you pissed her off. Fast forward to the medieval times, the age where giant churches existed, and statues were sculpted in the most obscure sex positions possible. I wish I was joking. Here, as Christianity became more popular, the term Hagazussa evolved into the word Haga, which loosely translates to a forest witch or nightmare spirit. It was used to create fear and became a demonic term to keep people within the hedge of society. In the 14th century, Haga was used to describe spirits like the night hag, a demonic creature believed to sit on your chest, stealing your breath while you slept, a medical term now known as sleep paralysis. Now, the term is cut even shorter to just hag. The supernatural power was stripped away, leaving only the physical repulsiveness. By the 1500s, it became a common slur for any older woman who was poor, unmarried, unpleasant, or just plain ugly. But it's crucial to understand the history behind the term because horror games tap into all three layers, sometimes even drawing from ancient folklore and mythology. So, to start, let's talk about the most primal level of fear hags represent.
Jack! Give me a hand here, Jack!
Recently, I played Resident Evil 7 for the first time, and it was great. A big fan of lumberjacking my own wife. The main antagonists are the Bakers, a family from Louisiana who are infected by the mold. One of these members is Marguerite Baker, the motherly figure of the family. She's associated with southern hospitality and insects. Throughout the game, she plays the role of a stalker enemy, who eventually turns into a grotesque boss fight. But it's really what she represents that makes her the perfect hag. She is a complete perversion of the phrase motherly love. One of the most infamous scenes in the game is a disgusting reflection of family dinner. She has prepared this feast for you and her family, but it's piled with repulsive food that I can't even begin to describe. It's a psychological twist on the heart and warmth of a family home. When you, of course, refuse to eat it, she freaks out and calls you
Son of a bitch!
Not exactly the words of a loving mother, I would say. Marguerite is a hag who corrupts the familiar and the love of a family woman. Even the things she does love are disgusting. Insects. When she's first infected, she refers to them as her pretties, disregarding her own children at this point. The love she does provide is faulty, and the things she truly loves are gross. She's essentially a provider of rot instead of life. Now in the story, the backstory, she appeals to that southern hospitality to lure unsuspecting victims, before killing them inside their estate. Now it's not explicitly stated, but it's inferred that the Bakers have resorted to cannibalism, the food she serves being body parts from the victims the family has killed. What truly makes her such a great hag and antagonist in general is the story before her infection. Inside the Daughters DLC, we witness a glimpse of the Baker family when they were normal. Here, Marguerite lives up to that Southern woman's love, gentleness, kindness, and that desire to support her family. That contrast is what makes her so effective. Because, those instincts never really went away, they're just twisted into something unrecognizable. She now, in a sense, weaponizes her motherhood. When you refuse to eat or disobey, the mask falls off in a sense, and she shows her true vicious personality. A true anti-mother. Funny enough, to pull back the curtain here a bit, I actually bought the game Granny to talk about in the anti-mother section. It just adds like a general addition, but after Marguerite, I feel like I already made my point here. I bought this game for the sole purpose of this video, and now I don't need it. Yeah, my life is really difficult. Subscribe to make me feel better. Alright, anyways, let's dive into the more supernatural side of hags. Witchcraft was a huge fear back in the day, the 16th and 17th century. Women were accused of being witches, using black magic, and making devilish pacts with the man downstairs. Those accused went under trials like pricking the skin to see if they feel pain, or they would tie heavy objects to their feet and throw them into the water. If they float, they's a witch. If they sink, they're human and most likely dead. I bring this up because this relates to the origins of supernatural tales and folklore relating to hags in general. It was not just a historical panic, it was the birth of legends. These fears didn't just vanish, they became stories, right? I have two examples of hags from games rooted in distinct regional folklore. Ironically, both haunt the same territory, deep, dark waters. Inside Little Nightmares, one of my favorite horror games, the main antagonist of the DLC's first chapter is simply known as the Granny. She's a lanky, wrinkled hag with strings of hair dangling from the sides of her head. Her body sags to an exaggerated level. During your playthrough, she's a boss that stalks you throughout the depths. Multiple times, you're forced to swim through dark waters where the Granny is close by. The water ripples and bubbles as she chases you down. If you're in the water for too long, the Granny will grab your character and pull you underwater, effectively drowning the child. She is a terrifying encounter because for most of this chapter, we don't really see what the Granny even looks like. Little Nightmares always does a phenomenal job of building tension and giving us sneak peeks at the antagonists before they make their full appearance. The Granny can be seen in the background, for example, sitting on her chair, before sulking into the water to chase you once again. When you're just about to escape, she becomes desperate, destroying the platforms you're on that were safe before, and showing her full visage for the first time. Now, her inspiration is not entirely known, but she has many similarities to Jenny Greenteeth, a malevolent hag from English folklore. She was depicted as a green, rotting hag, surprise, and was known for drowning unsuspecting children who would wander too close to the water's edge. She would occupy rivers, lakes, or streams and became a tale of caution for numerous children to stay away from large bodies of water where they could be potentially swept away. What really makes the Granny terrifying for me is how unexpected it is. I mean, you're in a large body of water, so of course I would assume a shark or something else aquatic. Instead, we have this elderly woman who is actively trying to drown you. Little Nightmares turns this cautionary tale from folklore into a horrific monster. Not to mention, deep waters is already something a good percentage of people fear, including myself. I almost drowned as a kid, so yeah, seeing the Granny pursue and stalk me as I'm flailing upon the water's surface, not exactly my favorite time. Specifically, using a hag in this circumstance really drives home the helplessness and the fear of the unknown. Video games amplify this by forcing us to navigate these threats directly. Navigate, like a boat, navigating the endless ocean. Ironically, the other game I want to mention for this section is very similar to Little Nightmares, Bramble the Mountain King. I recorded this game like a few years ago, and I thought maybe I'll never talk about it, but I'll keep it here just in case. I'm very glad I did now. Anyways, there's a chapter here where we have to cross this large body of water. The screen fades to black, and what appears behind us is an old woman wrapped in black clothing. This is Pesta, a plague hag from Scandinavian folklore. She represents, surprise, the plague, pestilence, and disease. She's often depicted with either a rake or a broom. If you see her holding a rake, it means that some villagers will escape her wrath, symbolically passing through the teeth. If you see her carrying a broom, it means everyone will perish. In Bramble the Mountain King, she's a supernatural spirit that causes multiple nightmare sequences where you have to dodge her attacks and counter her in complete darkness. It gives her authority over death and feels like your fate is in her hands. Thankfully, she's carrying a rake this time around, so with enough persistence, we can't escape. Both of these hags have supernatural ties to their in-game mechanics and design. It takes what we know as fragile, an old woman, and it creates this complete subversion of identity. Hags in video games are no longer weak, they're dark and disturbing, channeling otherworldly powers that cause death and fear among many. Games make us confront them directly, forcing helplessness, uncertainty, and fear of the unknown into every moment. But you know, that's not something many of us fear today. Very cool inspiration in stories, but like the average 10-year-old is not going to be afraid of Jenny Greenteeth. They're probably more afraid that they're going to get no V-Bucks for Christmas or something. So let's talk about a phobia that we can really grasp currently. Gerontophobia is an irrational fear, hatred, or aversion towards older adults and the aging process. Things like wrinkles or aging spots may trigger panic attacks or increased anxiety. It's rooted in the fear of the inevitable and fertility of life. I mean, we all die someday, and some will live to be very old when they do. It's a reminder of how fleeting life can be. In video games, the hag's aging process is of course exaggerated to evoke fear and create uncanny appearances to really play on this specific phobia. But what's really interesting is it's not just the physical aspect. Some people with gerontophobia are fearful of the deterioration of the mind. Now, all three examples so far play into the physical side of this phobia perfectly. Marguerite is middle-aged, I think she's in her mid-50s if I remember correctly, so not crazy old, but the graphics and lighting make her aged appearance seem almost malicious in a way. The granny is a wrinkly, sagging monster with only a few strands of hair that you can probably count at this point. A wide grin with teeth missing and discolored skin. Pesta, in some iterations, has a bent back and a face with a color of ash. I mentioned briefly the hag from Dead by Daylight, but there's also the witches of Hemwick, who are essentially crawling at this point with how messed up their posture is. Nobody's exactly excited to look like this, and again, games exaggerate their appearances for the sake of horror. I mean, shoot, even Nana from Luigi's Mansion fits here. Fun fact, as we age, the nose and ears never stop growing. So Nana's nose is elongated, her ears are actually kind of normal. But my point is that these hags are twisted mirrors of aging. And again, grandmas are never expected to be a source of terror, but when we put them into the right situation, that subversion of expectations is what really drives the horror here. When it comes to the mental regression, I have a rather horrifying character to end on. Mother Gooseberry from the Outlast Trials. Now, two things. According to her biography, she is only in her late 40s at max, so not very old, but the definition of a hag does not have a defined age group. Besides, her appearance is disturbing to say the least, so I feel like that more than makes up for the age difference. Secondly, when it comes to her deteriorating mind, it's not because she's old or a hag really, it's because of her backstory and trauma. She was abused by her father, so she has a split personality disorder, referring to her drill puppet as Mr. Futterman. She was once the host of a kids show, but because of her deteriorating health, she would encourage violent behavior in the children, and eventually wound up as a prime asset in the Outlast Trials. She's become a predator through her motherly facade, and that's the basic summary of her story, but it's a perfect symbol of how the mind can break as we get older. Hags are essentially the scapegoat for this fear. We think, oh, old age, that's still far away. My mind works, I'm still young, but this old lady right here, she's well past her prime, and she's crazy. It's an unacceptance or avoidance of the inevitable. Mother Gooseberry's insanity can genuinely occur in older patients. Of course, it's exaggerated in the game to a disturbing degree, but it has happened before. Ultimately, hags in horror games are more than just old women. They're vessels for our deepest fears about aging, fertility, and the mind's deterioration. Whether it's Marguerite's corrupted motherhood, Granny's grotesque waterbound stalking, or Mother Gooseberry's psychological unraveling, Each hag exaggerates the aspects of aging, decay, and spiritual warfare that unsettles us most. I like how games use their appearance mechanics and backstory to confront us with what we've, often ignore, the inevitability of time. The funny thing is, with horror media in general, a lot of the inspiration or roots is tied to facing things that we typically just don't want to face anymore, turning cultural anxieties into playable horror. And I really love the subverting of expectations about the frail old women. It really sets your mind for a loop. Like, I truly adore the older women in my life, but I can't see them in a horror game aspect. But it works so well here because, again, it takes something that's familiar to us, comforting, and twists it in such a terrible way. I mean, that's why children are so scary. In general, hags are terrifying because it's an unflinching reflection of what awaits us all: death. And this is the part of the video where I wonder, how am I going to end it? Anyways, subscribe. Thanks for watching if you watched this far. I really appreciate it. And yeah, kiss my boobs.